He fired the waitress for disrespect. The next day, the board forced the Sheikh billionaire to stand while she entered. The rain painted silver streaks down the tall windows of the Golden Arch restaurant, casting dancing shadows across the marble floors. It was the kind of place where silence spoke louder than words, where each table cost more than most people earned in a week, and where the weight of old money hung thick in the air like expensive cologne. Emma Carter moved between the tables with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned to disappear. At 26, she had perfected the art of being present without being seen. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her uniform pressed and spotless, her movements careful and deliberate. She carried a tray of crystal glasses, each one worth more than her monthly rent, and she moved as if the world might shatter if she breathed too hard. 3 years she had worked here. 3 years of swallowing her pride, of biting her tongue, of smiling through the casual cruelty of people who saw her as furniture. But she needed this job. Her grandmother's medical bills were mounting, the small apartment in Queens was barely affordable, and every dollar mattered. So she smiled, she served, and she made herself small. The restaurant's manager, Mr. Peterson, a thin man with silver hair and perpetually worried eyes, approached her station near the kitchen. His expression told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. "Table 7, he said quietly, "VIP reservation. Sheikh Rashid Al-Maziri. He's early." Emma felt her stomach tighten. She had heard the name whispered in the staff room, spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. The Sheikh was known for his impossible standards, his icy demeanor, and his ability to ruin careers with a single phone call. He owned half of Manhattan's skyline and answered to no one. "Emma," Mr. Peterson's voice was gentle but firm, "be perfect tonight, please." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She smoothed her uniform one more time, checked her reflection in the polished silver of a serving tray, and made her way to table 7. The entrance to the Golden Arch was designed for dramatic arrivals, and Sheikh Rashid Al-Maziri did not disappoint. He entered like a storm, dressed in Italian silk, his presence commanding every eye in the room without him having to utter a single word. He was tall, perhaps in his late 40s, with sharp features that looked carved from stone. His thobe was pristine white, tailored to perfection, and over it he wore a black bisht that moved like liquid shadow. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they swept across the room with a detached assessment of someone used to owning everything he saw. Behind him walked 2 men in dark suits, clearly security, and a nervous assistant clutching a tablet. They moved to table 7, the best table in the house, positioned by the window with a view of the rain-soaked city lights. Emma approached with a bottle of water, her heart hammering against her ribs. Up close, he was even more intimidating. There was something ancient in his bearing, something that spoke of desert kingdoms and unquestioned authority. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite name, a shadow behind his eyes, a heaviness in the set of his shoulders. "Good evening, sir," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome to the Golden Arch. May I—" "Water," he interrupted without looking at her, still not sparkling. "Room temperature." "Of course, sir." She poured carefully, her hands steady despite her nerves. The assistant was speaking rapidly in Arabic, pointing at the tablet screen. The Sheikh's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming once on the white tablecloth. Then his eyes lifted to Emma. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across his face. Confusion, recognition, pain. But it vanished so quickly she thought she might have imagined it. "The wine list," he said, and there was something strange in his voice, almost uncertain. "Right away, sir." Emma set down the water and reached for the leather-bound wine menu. Her fingers brushed the edge of his tablet, and the assistant jerked it away with a disapproving glare. The sudden movement startled her. Her elbow caught the water glass. Time slowed to a cruel crawl. The glass tipped, water arced through the air in a perfect crystalline curve, and then it wasn't water anymore. In her panic, her other hand had knocked the wine bottle Mr. Peterson had left for table 8. Red wine, a $3,000 bottle of Bordeaux, splashed across the Sheikh's pristine white thobe like blood on snow. The restaurant went silent. Every conversation died. Every fork stopped moving. Even the rain seemed to pause. Emma froze, her mind blank with horror. The red stains spread across the fabric, dark and accusing. She looked up at the Sheikh's face and saw something terrible there. Not anger, worse, disgust. The kind of look someone gives an insect they're about to crush. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, reaching for a napkin. "I'm so sorry. Please let me—" "Don't." His voice was cold as winter wind. "Touch. Nothing." She pulled her hand back as if burned. Tears stung her eyes, hot and humiliating. Around them she could feel the weight of every stare, hear the whispered gasps, sense the collective judgment. The Sheikh stood slowly, the wine dripping from his clothes. He looked down at her, and in that moment, she felt smaller than she had ever felt in her entire life. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Carter." "Emma Carter," he repeated it slowly, tasting each syllable, and again that strange flicker in his eyes. "Tell me, Emma Carter, do you know what this thobe cost?" She shook her head, mute with shame. $15,000, he said softly. "Tailored in Dubai, one of a kind, ruined by your carelessness." He turned to Mr. Peterson, who had materialized beside them, his face pale as death. "Is this the standard of service at the Golden Arch?" "Sir, I am profoundly sorry," Mr. Peterson began, his voice shaking. "This is unacceptable. We will, of course—" "Fire her." The words fell like an executioner's blade. Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Sir," Mr. Peterson's voice was barely audible. "I said, fire her. Now. I want her out of this restaurant in the next 5 minutes, or I will ensure that every person in this dining room knows that the Golden Arch employs incompetent staff who destroy their guests' property." "Please," Emma heard herself say, and hated how broken she sounded. "Please, I need this job. My grandmother is sick. I'm the only one who can—" "I don't care about your grandmother," the Sheikh's voice was flat, emotionless. "I care about the fact that you just ruined a garment worth more than you'll earn in a year. I care about the fact that your presence here is an insult to every guest in this room. I want you gone." Something in Emma snapped. Through the tears, through the shame, a spark of something else ignited. She looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw not a powerful man, but a cruel one. Not someone strong, but someone who used his power to crush those who couldn't fight back.
"I said I was sorry," she said, and her voice was steadier now. "It was an accident, a mistake. I'm human. But I guess that doesn't matter to someone like you, does it? We're all just furniture to you. Things you can throw away when they stop being useful." The Sheikh's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Excuse me? You heard me." The words were out before she could stop them, propelled by years of swallowed indignities and suppressed rage. "You walk in here like you own the world, and maybe you do, but that doesn't give you the right to destroy someone's life over an accident. I have worked here for 3 years without a single complaint, 3 years of serving people who look through me like I'm invisible. And one mistake, one moment, and you want to take everything from me? What kind of person does that?" The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Mr. Peterson looked like he might faint. The assistant's mouth hung open in shock. But Emma couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. "I'm sorry about your thobe," she continued, and her voice broke on the last word. "I truly am, but I'm not sorry for being human. I'm not sorry for mattering, even if you can't see it." She pulled off her apron with shaking hands, folded it neatly despite the tears streaming down her face, and set it on the table. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her spine straight, her head high, even as her entire world crumbled around her. Behind her, she didn't see the Sheikh's hand rise slightly, as if to stop her, didn't see the way his expression shifted from anger to something else, something confused and almost pained. Didn't see him turn to watch her go, his dark eyes following her until she disappeared through the rain-streaked doors. She stepped out into the storm, and the rain mixed with her tears until she couldn't tell the difference. The city lights blurred into streaks of color. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably Mr. Peterson calling to make the termination official. She ignored it and kept walking, her feet carrying her toward the subway station, toward home, toward her grandmother who would ask how her day was, and Emma would have to lie. The rain soaked through her thin jacket, chilled her to the bone, but she barely felt it. All she could feel was the echo of his words, the disgust in his eyes, the casual cruelty of someone who could destroy her life and feel nothing. She didn't know that at that very moment, in the restaurant she had just left, Sheikh Rashid Al-Masri stood motionless at his table, staring at the folded apron she had left behind. His assistant was speaking urgently about the schedule, the next meeting, the car waiting outside, but Rashid heard none of it. He was thinking about a voice that had said, "I'm so sorry," with such genuine anguish that it had cracked something inside him. A voice that sounded impossibly, devastatingly like another voice from 20 years ago. A voice he had spent 2 decades trying to forget. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out to touch the apron. Emma Carter. The name meant nothing to him, should mean nothing to him. But somewhere in the darkest corners of his memory, something stirred, something old and painful and buried deep. He pulled his hand back, turned to his assistant. "Cancel tonight's dinner," he said quietly. "We're leaving." As his car pulled away from the Golden Arch, Rashid stared out at the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan and tried to understand why he felt like he had just made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Why the image of a crying waitress haunted him more than any business deal he had ever had. Why her words, "What kind of person does that?" cut deeper than any insult he had ever received. He didn't know that tomorrow would bring answers he wasn't ready for, that the ghost of a voice would become the key to everything he had spent years trying to bury, that Emma Carter was about to destroy his entire world. But somewhere deep inside, in the place where he kept his secrets and his guilt, he knew something was coming, something that would change everything. The rain continued to fall over Manhattan, washing away the old world to make room for the new. In a small apartment in Queens, Emma sat beside her sleeping grandmother and cried silently into her hands. In a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Sheikh Rashid Al-Masri stood at his window and stared at the city below, feeling the weight of his past pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. Neither of them slept that night. Neither of them knew that by morning their lives would be irreversibly intertwined. Neither of them could have imagined the truth that was waiting, patient and terrible, to be revealed. But the truth, like the rain, was inevitable, and it was coming. The next morning arrived with brutal efficiency. Emma woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through thin curtains, and for one blessed moment she forgot. Then reality crashed back in. No job, no income, rent due in 2 weeks, her grandmother's medication running low. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She made coffee with hands that still trembled, trying to figure out her next move. Apply to other restaurants. Maybe go back to the diner in Queens where she had worked during college. It wouldn't pay enough, but it would be something, anything. Her phone rang at 7:30. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Miss Carter? This is Catherine Monroe from Hayes Morrison and Associates. We represent the corporate interests of Al-Masri Holdings. I'm calling to inform you that your presence is required at an emergency board meeting this morning at 9 o'clock. Emma's blood ran cold. "What? Why? I don't understand." "The address is 432 Park Avenue, 47th floor, 9 o'clock sharp.
This is not optional, Miss Carter. There will be legal consequences if you fail to appear." The line went dead. Emma stood frozen in her tiny kitchen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Her grandmother shuffled into the kitchen, wrapped in a faded blue robe coat. "Everything okay, sweetie?" Emma forced a smile. "Fine, Grandma. I have to go into the city for a meeting." "On your day off?" "Yeah, it's important." She showered quickly, her mind churning with possibilities, each one worse than the last. She put on the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black dress she had worn to her college graduation, paired with a cardigan her grandmother had knitted years ago. It was threadbare at the elbows, but it was all she had. The subway ride into Manhattan felt like traveling to her own execution. She emerged on Park Avenue at 8:45, staring up at the gleaming glass tower that housed Al-Masri Holdings. The building seemed to pierce the sky itself, a monument to power and wealth that made her feel impossibly small.
Security in the lobby checked her ID 3 times before allowing her to the elevator. The 47th floor. The ride up felt endless, her ears popping with the altitude. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that looked like something from a museum. Marble floors, original artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows with views that stretched to the horizon. A receptionist with perfect hair and a perfect smile directed her down a long hallway. "Conference room B. They're waiting for you." They're waiting. For her. Emma Carter, unemployed waitress from Queens. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stopped dead in her tracks. The conference room was enormous, dominated by a table that could seat 30 people, but only a dozen chairs were occupied. Men and women in expensive suits, all of them turning to stare at her as she entered. Lawyers, she realized. Corporate lawyers, with their leather briefcases and predatory eyes. And at the head of the table, standing because he had been pacing, was Sheikh Rashid Al-Masri. He looked different in the harsh morning light. Older, more tired. He wore a tailored gray suit now instead of the traditional thobe, but his bearing was the same, regal, untouchable, cold. When he saw her, he went completely still. "Miss Carter," one of the lawyers said, a middle-aged woman with steel gray hair and a voice that could cut glass. "Please, sit down." Emma remained standing. "What is this? Why am I here?" "My name is Margaret Thornton. I'm the head of the legal department for Al-Masri Holdings." The woman gestured to an empty chair directly across from the Sheikh. "This is an emergency session of the executive board. You are here because you have a legal right to be here." "I don't understand." "Sit down, Miss Carter." It wasn't a request. Emma sat, her legs shaking. She could feel the Sheikh's eyes on her, heavy and searching. She refused to look at him. Margaret Thornton opened a folder, pulled out a document, and slid it across the polished wood toward Emma. "Do you recognize this?" Emma leaned forward. It was old, yellowed with age. The ink faded but still legible. A corporate document. Articles of Incorporation. Al-Masri Holdings. Established 2003. 2 signatures at the bottom. One she didn't recognize, the other made her heart stop. Khalil Carter. Her father's name. "Where did you get this?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "It was filed with the state 22 years ago, when Al-Masri Holdings was first established. Your father, Khalil Carter, was the original co-founder and equal partner with Sheikh Rashid Al-Masri." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Emma shook her head. "No, that's not possible. My father was a mechanic. He died when I was 6. He worked on cars in Brooklyn. He never—" "Your father," Margaret interrupted gently, "was an engineer with a degree from MIT. He met Rashid Al-Masri in graduate school. They became friends, partners. When Rashid inherited his family's oil fortune, Khalil helped him invest it, helped him diversify, helped him build what became Al Masri Holdings. He was entitled to 50% of everything. Emma felt like the floor was tilting beneath her. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to breathe, trying to process. 50%? 50% of Al Masri Holdings, Margaret confirmed. Which makes you, Miss Emma Carter, the second largest shareholder of this company. As of this morning, you have a permanent seat on the executive board, full voting rights, and the legal authority to challenge any decision made by the majority shareholder. Emma turned to look at the Sheikh. His face had gone pale. His hands, which had been so steady last night when he dismissed her like garbage, trembled slightly at his sides. "Last night," Emma said softly, "you fired me. You humiliated me. You looked at me like I was nothing, like I didn't matter, like my life was so worthless you could destroy it over a stain on your clothes." He said nothing. What could he say? "And now," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "you have to stand there and realize that the woman you threw away owns 40% of everything you have. That I can walk into any meeting, any decision, any plan you have, and I can say no. I can stop you. I can question you. I can demand answers." Margaret spoke up. As per company bylaws, any shareholder with more than 35% ownership must be formally acknowledged by the board. Which means, Sheikh Al Masri, you are required to show proper respect to Miss Carter's position. In fact, she paused, and for the first time there was the faintest hint of satisfaction in her voice. Corporate protocol requires that when a new primary board member enters a meeting for the first time, all other members must stand in acknowledgement. The Sheikh's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, Emma saw something there she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not disgust. Pain. Deep, old pain. "You want me to stand," he said quietly. "Corporate protocol," Margaret repeated firmly. "And given that Miss Carter was not properly acknowledged at the beginning of this meeting due to unusual circumstances, the board insists on following protocol now." Around the table, the other board members shifted uncomfortably. This was unprecedented, humiliating, exactly what the Sheikh had done to her the night before. Emma stood slowly. Every eye in the room was on her. The girl who had served their wine, who had trembled at their tables, who had made herself invisible for 3 years. Now they would stand for her. Margaret stood first, then the other lawyers, then the board members, one by one, rising from their chairs, until only the Sheikh remained. The silence stretched between them, heavy with history and hurt. Finally, slowly, Sheikh Rashid Al Masri stood. And for the first time in his life, he bowed his head to someone he had once dismissed as beneath him. Emma looked at him across the expanse of the boardroom table, and she felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a vast, aching emptiness where justice should have lived. "I want answers," she said quietly. "I want to know everything. What you did to my father, why you did it, how you could live with yourself, everything." The Sheikh raised his eyes to meet hers, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Guilt, shame, and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "Your voice," he said hoarsely. "Last night when you said you were sorry, your voice sounds exactly like—" He trailed off, his face going even paler. "Like who?" Emma demanded. But he shook his head, turning away. "This meeting is adjourned. Miss Carter, my assistant will set up a private meeting, just you and me. If you want answers, I'll give them to you. But not here, not like this." He walked toward the door, his movements stiff,
His shoulders bowed as if carrying an invisible weight. At the threshold he paused, without turning around. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For last night, for your father, for everything. I know it doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry." Then he was gone, leaving Emma standing in a boardroom that suddenly felt too large, too empty, surrounded by strangers who now had to treat her as their equal. Margaret approached, her expression softening slightly. "There's a lot to process, Miss Carter. A lot of legal details to discuss. But for now, just know this. Your father loved you very much. Everything he did, every risk he took at the end was to protect you. He wanted you to have what was rightfully yours." Emma nodded numbly, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had come here expecting to be sued. Instead, she had discovered that her entire life was a lie, that her father had been a brilliant man, destroyed by his partner, that she now owned 40% of a billion-dollar empire, and the man who had humiliated her last night had been forced to bow his head to her this morning. But none of it felt like victory. It felt like opening a wound that never properly healed, like uncovering a grave that should have stayed buried. Her father was still dead. Her mother was still gone. Her childhood and poverty still happened. No amount of money or power could change that. As she left the Al-Maziri building and stepped back onto Park Avenue, she realized that she hadn't just inherited shares in a company. She had inherited a mystery, a tragedy, and a connection to a man she had every reason to hate. Sheikh Rashid Al-Mazri. The man who destroyed her father. The man whose voice carried the weight of old guilt. The man whose eyes held secrets she was suddenly desperate to understand. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just an address and a time. 8 p.m. A restaurant in Midtown. Private room reserved. She stared at the message for a long moment. She should refuse. Should make him wait. Should use her new power to make him suffer the way he had made her father suffer. The way he had made her suffer last night. But beneath her anger, beneath her hurt, something else stirred. Curiosity. And maybe, against all logic and reason, a desire to understand. Because when he had looked at her in that boardroom, when he had mentioned her voice, she had seen something flicker across his face that wasn't just guilt. It was recognition, and loss, and pain so deep it had its own gravity. Whatever the truth was, she needed to know it. All of it. Even if it destroyed her, even if it changed everything. The truth was waiting, and Emma Carter, who had spent her entire life being invisible, was finally ready to be seen. The afternoon passed in a haze. Emma went through the motions of normal life, checked on her grandmother, pretended everything was fine, made lunch she couldn't eat. Margaret Thornton's office had sent over documents, so many documents her head spun trying to read them. Financial statements, corporate structures, legal agreements written in language that might as well have been ancient Greek. But one thing was clear. She was worth, on paper at least, over $1 billion. The number was meaningless, impossible. She lived in a 3-room apartment with walls so thin she could hear the neighbors' conversations. She wore second-hand clothes and counted pennies for subway fare. And now she was supposed to be a billionaire? At 7:30, she stood in front of her closet and confronted a new kind of poverty. She had nothing to wear to dinner with a man who probably owned buildings. The black dress from this morning was her only option. She paired it again with her grandmother's cardigan, added her mother's simple silver necklace, the only jewelry she owned, and told herself it didn't matter what she looked like. This wasn't a date. This was a confrontation. The restaurant was small, elegant, tucked into a quiet street in Midtown. Nothing like the Golden Arch. This place felt older, more intimate, with dark wood panels and soft lighting. A hostess led her through the main dining room to a private area in the back, separated by velvet curtains. Sheikh Rashid Al-Mazri stood when she entered. He had changed from his suit to more traditional dress, a cream-colored thobe, simple and unadorned. No dish this time, no display of wealth. He looked smaller, somehow, more human. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Emma didn't sit. "Let's be clear about something. I am not here because you asked. I'm here because I need answers. That's all." "I understand," he gestured to the table. "Please, sit. I've ordered food, but if you'd prefer something else." "I don't want food. I want the truth." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then you'll have it." She sat, keeping her distance, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. He sat across from her, and in the soft candlelight she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. He looked tired, haunted.
"Where do I start?" he said, more to himself than to her. "Start with my father, how you met, how you became partners, and then how you destroyed him." Rashid flinched at the last words. "I met Khalil at MIT. I was 22, studying engineering because my father insisted I understand the oil industry from the ground up. I was arrogant, used to being the richest person in any room. Your father was different, brilliant, kind. He saw past the money, past the family name. He saw me." Emma watched him carefully, looking for lies, for manipulation, but his voice carried only exhaustion and regret. "We became friends," Rashid continued. "True friends, the kind you only get once in a lifetime. After graduation, I returned to Dubai to take over my family's business. But the industry was changing. Oil was becoming complicated. I needed to diversify, to invest in technology, real estate, renewable energy. I was lost. So I called Khalil." He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his water glass. "He came to Dubai, spent 2 years helping me build what would become Al Masri Holdings. His ideas, his vision, they were the foundation of everything. I provided the capital. He provided the genius. We were supposed to be equal partners, 50-50. I signed the papers myself. I meant every word." "So what happened?" Emma's voice was cold. "My uncle happened." Rashid's expression darkened. "Tariq Al-Masri, my father's younger brother. He had always resented my father's success, and when my father died, he expected to inherit control of the family fortune. Instead, it went to me. Tariq stayed involved in the business, but he hated playing second fiddle to his nephew, and he especially hated that I had partnered with an outsider, with an American." Emma felt sick. "He destroyed my father because he was American? He destroyed your father because Khalil had my trust and Tariq didn't." Rashid's hands clenched into fists. "Tariq spent months working behind the scenes, planting doubts, showing me forged documents that suggested Khalil was embezzling funds, arranging meetings Khalil couldn't attend, and then claiming he wasn't committed. Little by little, poisoning our partnership. And you believed him," Emma said flatly. "Yes." The word fell like a stone. "To my eternal shame, yes. I was young, still insecure, still afraid of making my father's peers think I was weak. Tariq knew exactly how to manipulate me. He made it seem like Khalil was taking advantage of our friendship, that he was using me for my money. By the time I realized what Tariq was doing, the damage was done." Rashid stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His back was to her, his shoulders rigid. "I confronted Khalil, accused him of theft, of betrayal. He was devastated, tried to explain, to show me the real numbers, to prove his innocence. But Tariq had been so careful. The forged documents looked authentic, and God help me, I chose to believe my blood over my friend." Emma's throat tightened. She could picture it too easily. Her father, gentle and trusting, being accused of something he didn't do, trying desperately to prove himself, failing because the game was rigged from the start. I pushed him out, Rashid continued, his voice rough with emotion, used legal maneuvers to dilute his shares, bought out his contracts, removed his name from the company history. I told myself I was protecting my family's legacy. I told myself I was being smart, being careful. The truth is, I was a coward who let someone else do his thinking for him. He turned back to face her, and Emma was shocked to see tears in his eyes. By the time I discovered Tariq's lies, found the real documents, understood the extent of his manipulation, 6 months had passed. I flew to New York to find Khalil, to apologize, to offer him everything back. But when I arrived at his last known address— "He was dead?" Emma whispered. He nodded slowly. "Heart attack," they said. But I knew the truth. I had broken his heart, destroyed his reputation, taken everything he had built. The stress, the betrayal, the financial ruin. I killed him as surely as if I had put a gun to his head. The restaurant felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. Emma tried to breathe, tried to process, tried to feel something other than the vast emptiness opening inside her chest. "I tried to find his family," Rashid said, "to make amends, to give them what was rightfully theirs. But your mother had moved, changed her name. I hired investigators, but they found nothing. After a few years, I stopped looking. I told myself they were better off without my blood money. The truth is, I was a coward again, afraid to face what I had done." "You lived with this for 20 years, Emma said, and her voice was hollow. "You built an empire on my father's grave and just lived with it." "No." His voice was fierce suddenly. "I didn't live with it. I survived it. Every day, every business deal, every success. It was all poison because I knew the foundation was built on betrayal. I threw myself into work because if I stopped, if I let myself think, I would drown in the guilt. I married, hoping love might make me feel human again. She died in childbirth, along with our daughter. I took that as judgment, as punishment, and I accepted it because I deserved it." "Stop, just stop," Emma said. "You wanted the truth. The truth is, you're a coward," her voice cracked. "You made choices. You chose to believe your uncle over your friend. You chose pride over trust. You chose to give up looking for us because facing us was too hard. You don't get to play the tragic victim here. You're not the one who suffered. My father did. My mother did. I did." "I know." His voice was barely audible. "You're right, all of it. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't even deserve the chance to explain. But you asked for the truth, and I'm giving it to you. All of it. Every ugly, shameful piece." Emma turned away, trying to hold back tears. "Why did you react that way yesterday, when you heard my voice? What did you mean?" A long silence. Then, "You sound like her." "Like who?" "Amira." The name came out like a confession. "Your mother." Emma spun around. "You knew my mother?" Rashid's face was ashen. "I met her once, 23 years ago. Khalil invited me to his wedding. It was small, intimate, at a church in Brooklyn. I was his best man. Your mother she was beautiful, kind. When she said her vows, her voice was like music, like light. I remember thinking Khalil was the luckiest man alive." His hands were shaking now. "Years later, after Khalil died, after my wife died, I would sometimes remember that day, your mother's voice, the way she looked at Khalil with such love. It became a kind of torture, a reminder of what I had destroyed, what I would never have." "And when you spoke last night," Emma said slowly, understanding dawning, "when I apologized, it was her voice." Rashid's words tumbled out in a rush. "Exact her voice. Same tone, same gentleness. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I was losing my mind, thought I was being haunted. That's why I stared at you, why I seemed confused. You sounded like a ghost. Emma felt something crack inside her chest. This man, this cruel, powerful man who had destroyed her father, had been carrying his own kind of pain. It didn't excuse what he had done, didn't erase the suffering he had caused, but it made him human. Tragically, completely human.
"Your uncle," she said after a long moment. "Tariq. He's still involved in the company?" Rashid's expression darkened. "Yes. He sits on the board, controls about 15% of the shares. And he's the reason I wanted to meet with you privately. Because when he finds out about your inheritance, about your father's trust, he will do everything in his power to destroy you. Let him try. You don't understand. Tariq is dangerous. He spent decades building his power base. He has connections in governments, in criminal organizations, in places I don't even want to know about. If he sees you as a threat to his position—" "I am a threat to his position," Emma interrupted. "I'm a threat to everyone's position, including yours. 40% ownership means I can make your lives very difficult." "I know," Rashid met her eyes. "And you should. You should make us pay for what we did. You should tear apart everything Tariq and I built on your father's broken dreams. It would be justice." "But—" Emma could hear the unspoken word hanging in the air. "But it would also destroy everything your father wanted. He didn't create that trust to give you revenge. He created it to give you opportunity, to let you build something better than what we built, to let his daughter succeed where he failed." Emma sank back into her chair, exhausted. "I don't know how to be a billionaire. I don't know how to sit on boards or make corporate decisions. 24 hours ago, I was worried about making rent. Now you're telling me I'm supposed to, what, save my father's legacy? Defeat some corporate villain? I'm a waitress, Rashid, or I was, until you fired me." "I know." He sat down across from her again, and for the first time his expression softened. "I know this is overwhelming, impossible. But you're Khalil's daughter. You have his intelligence, his integrity, his courage. I saw it last night when you stood up to me, when you called me out for my cruelty. You didn't know who you were then, but you knew who you were. That takes strength." "Strength?" Emma repeated bitterly. "I cried all the way home." "Strength isn't not crying, it's crying and getting back up anyway." Rashid hesitated, then reached across the table. He stopped short of actually touching her hand, but the gesture was there. "Let me help you. Let me teach you the business, show you how to navigate the board, how to read the financials, how to protect yourself from people like Tariq. Not because I deserve forgiveness, but because it's what I should have done for your father." Emma stared at his outstretched hand, so close but not quite touching. This man had destroyed her family, had lived in luxury while she and her mother struggled, had fired her less than 24 hours ago for the crime of being human. Every logical, rational part of her brain screamed to refuse, to walk away, to use her 40% ownership to burn his empire to the ground. But another part of her, the part that sounded like her father in the few memories she had, whispered something different. Her father had trusted this man once, had called him friend. Yes, that trust had been betrayed, but maybe, just maybe, there was something worth saving underneath the guilt and the regret. "One condition," she said finally. "Anything. You tell me about him. My father. What he was like. The things you built together. The dreams he had. I want to know the man who died believing he was a failure. I want to know the genius who helped create an empire. I want to know my father." Rashid's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I will tell you everything. Every conversation, every late night working on proposals, every dream he shared. Your father was extraordinary, Emma, and you deserve to know just how extraordinary he was."
She nodded slowly, then stood. I need time to think. About the company. About you. About all of this. Don't contact me. When I'm ready, I'll reach out. Of course. He stood as well, maintaining his distance. But Emma? What? Watch out for Tariq. He'll approach you, try to befriend you, offer to help. Everything he says will be a lie designed to manipulate you. Trust nothing he tells you. Promise me. Emma studied his face, looking for ulterior motives, but she saw only genuine concern. I promise. But Rashid? Yes. If I find out you've lied to me about anything, if I discover any of this story isn't true, I will use every penny of my father's legacy to destroy you, completely. Do you understand? I understand. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable yesterday. And I would deserve it. Emma left the restaurant without looking back. The night air was cool against her flushed cheeks. Her mind churned with everything she had learned, everything she still didn't understand. She had expected to hate him more after hearing the truth. Instead, she felt something far more complicated. Pity, understanding, and underneath it all, a strange kind of kinship. They were both victims of Tariq's manipulation, both carrying guilt they couldn't shed, both haunted by the ghost of Khalil Carter. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Thornton. Board meeting scheduled for next Monday. Mandatory attendance. Tariq has requested to meet with you beforehand. Decline or accept? Emma stared at the message. This was it. The moment where she decided what kind of person she would be. The kind who ran from confrontation or the kind who walked straight into the fire. She typed her response. Accept. Tomorrow. His office, noon. And then she added, and I want Rashid there too. If Tariq wanted to play games, she would play, but she would play on her terms, with her father's courage, and maybe, just maybe, with Rashid's hard-won wisdom. The pieces were moving into position. The truth was slowly emerging from decades of lies, and Emma Carter, the invisible waitress who had served the powerful their wine, was about to show them exactly what happened when the powerless finally found their voice. The game had just begun, and she was done being dismissed. The next morning arrived with the weight of impossible expectations. Emma stood in front of her closet again, confronting the same problem. She looked like a waitress trying to play executive. Margaret had called at 8 a.m. with a solution. A car would pick her up at 10:30. There would be a stop first. No explanations. The black town car arrived precisely on time. The driver took her to Fifth Avenue, pulling up in front of a boutique's window display probably cost more than her annual salary. Margaret was waiting on the sidewalk, impeccable in a charcoal suit. If you're going to sit across from Tariq Al-Masri, you need armor, she said without preamble. Come on. Inside, sales associates descended like helpful predators. Within an hour, Emma was standing in front of a full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself. The navy blue suit was perfectly tailored, professional but not stuffy. The cream silk blouse underneath was soft as water. Simple heels that somehow made her feel taller, stronger. Her hair had been styled, her makeup applied with a light hand.
Better, Margaret said with satisfaction. Now you look like a woman who owns 40% of a billion-dollar company. I look like I'm playing dress-up. Fake it until you make it, sweetheart. Tariq will be looking for weakness. Don't give him any. They arrived at Al-Masri Holdings at 11:45. Emma's stomach churned with nerves. Margaret squeezed her arm once before they entered. Remember, everything he says is calculated. Trust your instincts. And don't agree to anything without having me review it first. The receptionist directed them to the executive floor. Tariq's office was at the opposite end from Rashid's, a power play in geography. The door was already open. Tariq Al-Masri looked nothing like his nephew. Where Rashid was tall and austere, Tariq was shorter, rounder, with a well-groomed beard and eyes that sparkled with what might be warmth or might be malice. He wore traditional dress, a pristine white thobe and a red-checked guntra, and his smile was welcoming as he stood to greet them. "Miss Carter, what a pleasure!" His English carried a heavier accent than Rashid's, musical and charming. "Please, please sit. Can I offer you coffee, tea?" "No, thank you." Emma sat in the chair Margaret indicated, across from Tariq's massive desk. The office was decorated with obvious wealth, ancient pottery, framed Arabic calligraphy, photographs of Tariq shaking hands with presidents and princes. "I must tell you," Tariq continued, settling into his chair with a contented sigh, "discovering Khalil's daughter after all these years, it is like finding a piece of history we thought lost forever. Your father was a remarkable man, truly remarkable." Emma's jaw tightened. "You knew my father?" "Oh, yes. I had the privilege of working with him during the early days of Al-Masri Holdings. His mind, Miss Carter, his brilliant mind. We were all in awe." "That's not what I heard." Emma kept her voice level. "I heard you worked very hard to destroy him." The smile never left Tariq's face, but something shifted in his eyes, a sharpening. "Is that what Rashid told you? How predictable. Are you saying it's not true?" Tariq leaned forward, his expression becoming serious, concerned, almost fatherly. "Emma, may I call you Emma? Emma, I want to be very honest with you. What happened to your father was a tragedy, a terrible tragedy. But the version of events my nephew has told you is, shall we say, incomplete." "Then complete it." "Your father was indeed brilliant, but he was also troubled. There were financial irregularities, money that went missing, deals that seemed questionable. I tried to protect him, tried to cover for him, because I liked him so much. But eventually, Rashid found out, and my nephew, as you may have noticed, can be quite ruthless when he feels betrayed." "You're lying." Emma felt rage building in her chest. "Am I?" Tariq then found 3 independent forensic accountants. "Show them. They had no father. I didn't use them because you're my father's brother, because family loyalty meant something to me, because I was fool enough to believe you might actually feel remorse." Rashid's voice was quiet now, dangerous, but Emma deserves the truth, all of it. "The truth," Tariq said, standing slowly, "is that you have always been weak, Rashid, weak and sentimental, just like your father. You should have married into another oil family, strengthened our alliances. Instead, you married some nobody who couldn't even survive childbirth. You destroyed Khalil because he saw what you were, and now you're trying to manipulate me because you're terrified I'll do the same thing to you." Tariq's face flushed red. "You have no idea what you're talking about, little girl. This company, this empire, it takes more than idealism and good intentions to run. It takes strength, ruthlessness, the willingness to do what must be done." "Like framing innocent men?" Emma stepped closer to his desk. "Like lying to your own nephew? Like building your power on someone else's grave?" "I did what was necessary." "You did what was evil." Emma's voice rang out clear and strong. "And I'm going to prove it. Every forged document, every lie, every manipulation, I'm going to expose all of it. And then I'm going to watch as the board votes to remove you." Tariq laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "With what? 40%? You need 51% for removal. Rashid has 45. You have 40. That's only 85. I have 15. Do the math, little girl. You can't touch me." "Maybe not alone." Emma turned to Rashid. "But what if we vote together?" The room went silent. Rashid stared at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. Tariq went very still. "You want to form a voting alliance?" Rashid asked quietly.
"I want to remove the cancer from this company, the cancer that killed my father. If that means working with you, then yes, we vote together. 45 plus 40 is 85. That's enough to outvote him on everything. And if we can convince even one other board member—" "We have majority control," Rashid finished, understanding dawning. "We can do anything, change anything, including vote for removal of board members." "This is insane," Tariq sputtered. "Rashid, you can't seriously be considering partnering with her. She's been here for 5 minutes. She knows nothing about the business, about our operations." "She knows everything she needs to know," Rashid said quietly. his eyes never leaving Emma's. She knows right from wrong. She knows justice from cruelty. And she knows, unlike me 20 years ago, not to trust you. Emma held out her hand to Rashid. Partners? He stared at her hand for a long moment. She could see the decades of guilt and regret warring in his expression. See him calculating risks, considering consequences. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and shook her hand. Partners, he agreed. For your father and for whatever comes next. Emma felt the warmth of his hand, the firmness of his grip. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was trust, fragile and new and terrifying. Tariq's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this, both of you. I have resources you can't imagine, connections that go deeper than you know. If you try to remove me from this board, I will burn this entire company to the ground before I let you win. Then we'll rebuild it, from the ashes, the way my father would have wanted. She turned and walked toward the door, Rashid following. Behind them, Tariq's voice rang out, sharp with venom. Your father was weak. He died weak, and his daughter is just as pathetic. Emma paused at the threshold, turned back. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but carried the weight of iron. My father died fighting for what he believed in. What have you ever built, Mr. Al-Masri? What legacy will you leave, besides fear and ashes? She smiled coldly. See you at the board meeting Monday. They left together, Rashid and Emma, unlikely allies bound by shared purpose and old ghosts. Behind them, Tariq stood alone in his office, surrounded by his expensive things, his photographs with powerful men, his displays of stolen wealth. And for the first time in 20 years, he felt the cold touch of fear. In the hallway, Margaret was waiting with a satisfied expression. Well? We have work to do. A lot of work. We need to review every document Tariq ever filed, every decision he influenced, every vote he cast. I want evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. That could take weeks, Margaret warned. Then we'd better get started. She turned to Rashid. I'll need access to the company archives. Everything from the founding documents to present day, and I'll need someone I can trust to help me understand what I'm looking at. I'll clear my schedule, Rashid said immediately. Whatever you need, however long it takes. Why? Why are you doing this? Really? Is it just guilt, or is there something else? Rashid met her eyes, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression was completely open, vulnerable. Because your father was my friend, the best friend I ever had. And I destroyed him because I was too proud, too insecure, too stupid to see the truth. I can't bring him back, can't undo what I did, but maybe if I help you finish what he started, if I help you claim what should have been his voice cracked, maybe I can finally forgive myself. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. You don't deserve forgiveness. I know. But maybe we both deserve closure. She took a shaky breath. Let's get to work. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the company archives, surrounded by boxes of documents dating back to the company's founding. Margaret joined them along with 2 junior lawyers she trusted. Rashid proved to be an excellent teacher, patiently explaining corporate structures, financial statements, the meaning behind the legal jargon. Emma absorbed it all like someone dying of thirst. Every document they reviewed, every detail Rashid explained, brought her closer to understanding the empire her father had helped build. And slowly, gradually, a picture emerged. Not just of Tariq's corruption, but of her father's brilliance. Look at this, Rashid said, his voice soft with memory. He held up an old proposal, the edges yellowed with age. This was Khalil's plan for diversifying our energy investments. Renewable technology, battery storage, solar infrastructure. We thought he was crazy. Oil prices were high, traditional energy was booming. Why invest in something so risky? But he was right, Emma said, reading over his shoulder. He was always right. 10 years ahead of the market. If we had followed this plan, if Tariq hadn't blocked it because he was afraid of change, we would be the leading green energy company in the world right now. Rashid set the document down carefully. Your father saw the future, and we were too blind to listen. As the afternoon wore into evening, Emma began to see something else. Not just evidence of Tariq's crimes, but glimpses of who Rashid had been before the guilt consumed him. Young, idealist, trusting. Not so different from her father. Did you love him, my father? Like a brother? Rashid was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Like a brother, like a friend, like the best part of myself that I killed the day I believed Tariq's lies. Emma nodded slowly, understanding. Then help me do this right. Help me honor his memory, not with revenge, with justice. Justice, Rashid repeated as if tasting the word, testing its weight. Yes, justice. For Khalil and for the man I should have been. They worked late into the night, building their case, piece by piece, document by document. Outside the office windows, Manhattan sparkled with artificial stars, oblivious to the quiet revolution happening 47 floors above the streets. Two people, brought together by tragedy and bound by purpose, preparing to face down a man who had spent 20 years believing he was untouchable. Monday's board meeting was going to change everything. Tariq knew it, Rashid knew it, and Emma, who 3 days ago had been serving wine and making herself invisible, knew it too. She was invisible no longer. She was her father's daughter, and she was done being dismissed. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Emma barely slept, her dreams haunted by documents and her father's face in old photographs Rashid had shared. In one, Khalil stood beside a younger Rashid, both of them smiling at some private joke, their arms around each other's shoulders. Friends. Brothers. Before everything fell apart. Saturday night, her grandmother asked the question Emma had been dreading. Sweetie, you've been different all week. What's going on? Did something happen at work? Emma sat beside her on the worn sofa, took her thin hand. Grandma, I need to tell you something about Dad.
Helen Carter's eyes, still sharp despite her illness, searched Emma's face. Your father. Emma, what? He didn't fail, Grandma. He was successful, brilliant. He helped build a billion-dollar company, and then someone stole it from him. The old woman's hand trembled in Emma's. I don't understand. Neither did I, not until this week. Emma told her everything. The trust fund, the inheritance, Rashid, Tariq, the documents proving her father's partnership. As she spoke, tears rolled down her grandmother's weathered cheeks. He never told me, Helen whispered, about the company, about what they did to him. He just came home one day and said it was over, that he had failed, that he was sorry. I thought, God help me, I thought he had just given up. He didn't give up, Grandma. He fought and he protected me. Everything he did at the end was to make sure I'd have what they stole from him. Helen gripped Emma's hand with surprising strength. What are you going to do? I'm going to finish what he started. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about who he was, what he built, and I'm going to make the man who destroyed him answer for it. Be careful, sweetheart. Powerful people don't like being challenged. I know, Emma kissed her grandmother's forehead. But I'm not alone, and I'm not afraid anymore. Monday morning arrived with perfect clarity. The sky was cloudless, the air crisp with autumn's approach. Emma dressed in another new suit, this one charcoal gray, and looked at herself in the mirror.
She looked like her father, had his eyes, his chin, his serious expression. She hoped she had his courage, too. The car Margaret sent arrived at 8. They rode to Al Masri Holdings in silence, both of them reviewing notes, preparing for battle. The lobby was already busy with employees starting their day. None of them looked at Emma twice. They didn't know yet, didn't know that the waitress they might have seen serving their business lunches was about to reshape their entire company. The executive conference room was different from where they'd met last week, larger, more formal. A massive table dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs. Already, board members were filtering in, men and women in expensive suits, carrying tablets and coffee. They glanced at Emma with curiosity, but didn't approach. Tariq arrived flanked by his own lawyers, his expression carved from stone. He took his seat at the table without acknowledging Emma's presence. A power move. She ignored it. Rashid was the last to enter, precisely at 9 o'clock. He had chosen to wear a dark suit instead of traditional dress today. Another message. This was business. This was war. He took the seat at the head of the table, and Emma sat to his right. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. This emergency session of the Al Masri Holdings board is now in order, Rashid began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. We have significant business to address. First, I want to formally introduce our newest board member, Miss Emma Carter, who holds 40% ownership through inheritance from her father, Khalil Carter, founding partner of this company. Murmurs rippled around the table. Most of the board members had heard rumors, but confirmation was different. Emma felt dozen pairs of eyes assessing her, calculating what her presence meant for their own positions. Second, Rashid continued, Miss Carter and I have formed a voting alliance. Effective immediately, our combined 85% ownership will be voting as a unified bloc on all major decisions. The murmurs became louder. Tariq's expression darkened. Third, and here Rashid's voice hardened, we are calling for an investigation into financial irregularities and potential fraud related to the events of 20 years ago, specifically regarding the removal of Khalil Carter from the company. This is absurd, Tariq interjected. Those events were settled legally 2 decades ago. You can. Rashid's eyes were cold. As majority shareholder, I have every right to request an internal investigation, and with Miss Carter's support, that investigation is now mandatory. He nodded to Margaret, who stood and began distributing folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find a preliminary report compiled by our legal team. It outlines numerous discrepancies in the documents used to justify Mr. Khalil Carter's removal. Forged signatures, falsified financial records, manufactured evidence. This is a witch hunt, Tariq said, his voice rising. A personal vendetta dressed up as corporate oversight. Is it? Emma spoke for the first time, her voice clear and steady. Then you should welcome an investigation. If you did nothing wrong, you have nothing to hide. Tariq turned to her, his smile venomous. You understand nothing about this business, child. You've been a shareholder for less than a week. You think you can waltz in here and accuse board members of crimes based on old paperwork and your nephew's guilty conscience? I think, Emma said calmly, that my father was destroyed by someone in this room. I think documents were forged, evidence was manufactured, and a good man was driven to his death. And I think the person responsible has spent 20 years profiting from that crime. She leaned forward. So yes, Mr. Al Masri, I absolutely think we should investigate. One of the other board members, an older woman named Patricia Montgomery, cleared her throat. If I may, I've reviewed the preliminary report. The forensic evidence is compelling. I move that we vote on authorizing a full independent investigation. Second, another member added. Tariq looked around the table, seeing the support crumbling. Rashid, you can't be serious about this. I'm your uncle, your father's brother. Whatever mistakes were made weren't mistakes. They were calculated, deliberate, evil, and I should have stopped you 20 years ago. He stood, all in favor of authorizing an independent investigation into the events surrounding Khalil Carter's removal from Al Masri Holdings. Say aye. Aye, Emma said immediately. Aye. Rashid echoed. Around the table, one by one, the other board members voted, some reluctantly, some with relief, but the result was unanimous. Tariq sat frozen, his face pale. "You're making a mistake, all of you." "The only mistake," Rashid said, his voice heavy with finality, "was letting you stay on this board for so long, letting you poison this company with your corruption. That ends today." He turned to Margaret. "Draft the paperwork. I want the investigation started immediately. Full access to all company records, independent auditors, complete transparency." "And one more thing," Emma added, pulling out a document she had been carrying in her folder. "I'm establishing the Khalil Carter Foundation, a nonprofit focused on supporting engineers and innovators from underrepresented backgrounds. Seed funding of $100 million from my personal shares." Gasps rippled around the table. Even Rashid looked surprised. "I don't want my father remembered as a victim. I want him remembered as a visionary, someone who saw the future and tried to build it. The foundation will give other people like him a chance, a real chance." She met Tariq's eyes. "That's what justice looks like. Not revenge, legacy." For the first time since Emma had met him, Tariq had no response. He stood abruptly, gathering his papers. "This isn't over."
Yes, Rashid said quietly. It is. Security will escort you from the building. You're suspended from the board pending the results of the investigation. Your access to company systems is revoked effective immediately. 2 security guards appeared at the door as if summoned. Tariq looked at his nephew with something like hatred. "Your father would be ashamed of you." "No," Rashid said, his voice breaking slightly. "My father would be ashamed of what I became when I listened to you. But maybe, finally, he'd be proud of who I'm trying to be now." Tariq left, his footsteps echoing in the silent conference room. When the door closed behind him, Emma felt something release in her chest. Not victory, exactly, but resolution. The first step toward justice. The meeting continued with procedural matters, authorization forms, legal protocols, scheduling for the investigation. Emma listened, learned, asked questions when she didn't understand. The other board members, no longer seeing her as a threat, but as an ally, began to warm to her. Patricia Montgomery invited her to lunch to discuss the foundation. Others offered advice, contacts, support. By the time the meeting adjourned at noon, Emma felt like she had run a marathon. But it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from fighting for something that mattered. In the hallway outside, Rashid caught up to her. "That was extraordinary. The foundation. I didn't know you were planning that." "I wasn't until this morning, but it felt right. My father's money should help people the way he wanted to help people. Build things, create opportunities. He would have loved it." Rashid's smile was sad. Khalil always believed the best investment was in people, not profits. Emma turned to face him fully. "Thank you for supporting me in there, for standing up to Tariq. I know it wasn't easy. It was 20 years overdue." He hesitated. "Emma, I know we're partners now, allies. But I want you to know, I don't expect forgiveness. What I did to your father, the pain I caused your family, it's unforgivable. I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do, not because I think it erases my guilt." Emma studied his face, seeing the lines of old pain, the genuine remorse. "I don't forgive you," she said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm starting to understand you. And maybe that's enough for now." He nodded, accepting. "It's more than I deserve." "Probably." She smiled slightly. "But my father chose you for a friend for a reason. Maybe I need to understand that reason before I can decide what to do with all this anger I'm carrying. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. For whatever you need, however long it takes." They stood in the hallway, 2 people bound by tragedy, working towards something that might, someday, resemble healing. Outside the windows, Manhattan sprawled in all directions, indifferent to their small drama, their quiet revolution. Emma's phone buzzed. "Margaret." Texting. "Press wants a statement about your board position and the foundation. What do you want me to tell them?" Emma thought for a moment, then typed, "Tell them Khalil Carter's legacy lives on, and his daughter isn't finished yet." She looked up at Rashid. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" "Yes," Rashid said. "The investigation will take months. Tariq won't go quietly. There will be legal battles, media scrutiny, probably attempts to discredit both of us." "Good. Let them try. They've spent my whole life being invisible, being dismissed, being told I don't matter. I'm done with that. If they want to fight, they'll get one." Rashid's expression shifted to something like respect. "You really are Khalil's daughter." "I really am." She held out her hand again. "Partners?" He took it without hesitation this time. "Partners? For your father? For justice? And maybe, if we're very lucky, for redemption." They shook on it, sealing an alliance that would reshape not just a company, but their own damaged souls. The hard part was just beginning. But for the first time since her father died, Emma felt like she was finally on the right path, finally fighting the right fight, finally becoming the person her father had hoped she would be. The waitress who had spilled wine was gone. In her place stood Emma Carter, board member, philanthropist, her father's daughter, and she was ready for whatever came next. The investigation moved with surprising speed. Margaret assembled a team of independent auditors, forensic accountants, and legal specialists who descended on Al-Masri Holdings archives like archaeologists excavating a crime scene. What they found was worse than Emma had imagined. Tariq's corruption wasn't limited to her father's case. Over 20 years, he had systematically embezzled funds, manipulated contracts, and used his position to enrich himself at the company's expense. The scope of the fraud was staggering, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. But proving it in a way that would stand up in court was another matter entirely. Tariq had been careful, covering his tracks, using shell companies and offshore accounts. The evidence was there, but buried deep, fragmented across decades of financial records. Emma threw herself into the work with single-minded focus. She spent 14-hour days in the archives, learning to read balance sheets and spot anomalies. Rashid was beside her most days, teaching her, guiding her, showing her the difference between legitimate business practices and the subtle tricks Tariq had used to hide his crimes. They fell into a rhythm, the two of them. Early mornings reviewing documents over coffee, long afternoons with the legal team building timelines, connecting dots, quiet evenings when the offices were empty, and they would talk about things beyond business, about loss, guilt, the weight of living with regret. "Tell me about her," Emma said one night, 3 weeks into the investigation. They were alone in the conference room, surrounded by file boxes, the city lights painting shadows on the walls. "Your wife, you said your name was—" "Layla." Rashid's voice was soft. "She was a doctor, brilliant, kind. I met her at a charity event. She made me laugh, which I hadn't done in years. I thought maybe with her I could finally be someone other than the man who destroyed his best friend." "Did it work?" "For a while. She knew about Khalil. I told her everything. She didn't judge me, but she challenged me to be better, to find him, to make amends. I was planning to do exactly that when she got pregnant." His expression crumpled. She was so excited, so ready to be a mother, and then— "I'm sorry," Emma said quietly when he couldn't continue. "I told myself it was punishment, that God was showing me what it felt like to lose someone you love. But the truth is worse than that. The truth is that bad things happen to good people for no reason at all. Layla didn't die because I betrayed Khalil. She died because childbirth is dangerous and medicine isn't perfect. But I couldn't separate the two. So I've spent the last 8 years convinced I don't deserve happiness, don't deserve peace. And now?" Rashid met his eyes. "Now I'm starting to think maybe punishment isn't the point. Maybe the point is to do better, to help someone else the way I should have helped your father, to build something good from the ruins of my mistakes." Emma felt something shift in her chest, a softening. Not forgiveness, but something adjacent to it. Understanding, empathy. "He would have liked you, I think, the person you're becoming." "I hope so. Because the person I was doesn't deserve to speak his name." "I hope so too,
because the person I was doesn't deserve to speak his name.
It was in these quiet moments, stripped of corporate armor and social performance, that Emma began to see past her anger. Rashid wasn't a villain. He was a man who had made terrible choices and spent half his life paying for them. That didn't erase the harm, didn't bring her father back, but it made him human, complicated, real. One evening in mid-November, Margaret burst into their makeshift war room with a triumphant expression. "We found it! The smoking gun!" She spread documents across the table. Bank statements, wire transfers, emails. In 2003, right when Khalil was being pushed out, Tariq opened an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Over 18 months, $47 million moved from Al-Masri Holdings into that account through a series of shell companies. The transactions were disguised as consulting fees and operational expenses. But look, she pointed to a series of dates. Every major withdrawal corresponds to a day when Tariq cast a vote against one of Khalil's proposals or blocked one of his initiatives. Emma felt her heart racing. He was paying himself, using company money to buy his own power. Exactly. And here's the best part. Some of those shell companies filed paperwork with forged signatures. Khalil's signature, making it look like he authorized the transactions. So, when Rashid discovered money missing, Emma said slowly, understanding dawning, Tariq already had documents showing it was Khalil who took it. Brilliant and evil, Margaret confirmed. He framed Khalil for his own embezzlement. And then, after Khalil was pushed out, Tariq continued to steal for 20 years. We estimate the total fraud is over $200 million. Rashid had gone very pale. He sank into a chair, his hands trembling. I believed him. God help me. I looked at those forged documents and I believed him. I destroyed my best friend based on lies so obvious, so transparent. If I had just looked deeper. Stop, Emma's voice was firm. She moved to his side, putting a hand on his shoulder. Tariq manipulated you. That's what manipulators do. They exploit trust and love and family loyalty. Yes, you should have looked deeper, but he spent months building that lie, making it convincing. You were young and scared, and he was your uncle. The person who's responsible for this is Tariq, not you. She's right, Margaret added, and now we have enough evidence to not only remove him from the board, but to press criminal charges. Wire fraud, embezzlement, forgery. He's looking at serious prison time. Emma felt a fierce satisfaction. Let's do it. File criminal charges. I want him arrested. Publicly. Are you sure? Rashid asked quietly. Once we take that step, there's no going back. Tariq is powerful friends. He'll retaliate however he can. Let him try. Emma's voice was steel. My father spent 20 years in a grave, branded as a failure and a thief. Tariq al-Masri can spend the next 20 in prison. It's more mercy than he deserves. The arrest happened on a gray December morning. Federal agents arrived at Tariq's Manhattan apartment at dawn, executing a warrant for his arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. The media, tipped off by someone in law enforcement, captured footage of Tariq being led out in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage. By noon, it was the top story on every financial news network. Al-Masri Holdings executive arrested in massive fraud scheme. 20-year corporate conspiracy exposed. Billionaire's uncle allegedly embezzled $200 million. Emma watched the coverage from Rashid's office, feeling numb. This was victory. This was justice. But it felt hollow somehow. Tariq's arrest didn't bring her father back. Didn't erase the years of poverty and struggle. Didn't heal the wounds.
"You're disappointed," Rashid observed, standing beside her at the window. "I thought I'd feel different, satisfied, but mostly I just feel tired." "Justice is like that," he said quietly. "It's necessary, essential, but it doesn't heal the way we want it to. The only thing that heals is time and forgiveness and building something new." Emma turned to face him. "Is that what we're doing? Building something new?" "I hope so." He met her eyes. "The foundation launches next month. You've already started changing this company for the better. The employees respect you. The board trusts you. You're doing what Khalil would have wanted." "Am I?" Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Because most days I feel like I'm just playing dress-up, like I'm a waitress pretending to be an executive. I don't know if I'm honoring my father's legacy or just trying to fill a void I don't understand." "You're doing both," Rashid said gently, "and that's okay. Legacy isn't about perfection, Emma. It's about showing up, trying, caring enough to make a difference." He hesitated, then added, "Your father would be so proud of you, not because you're running a company or managing billions, but because you stood up to me, called me out for my cruelty, demanded justice, refused to be invisible. That takes courage, real courage." Emma felt something break inside her. The tears she'd been holding back for weeks, maybe months, finally spilled over. Rashid awkwardly offered a handkerchief, then hesitantly put an arm around her shoulders. She let herself lean into the comfort, let herself cry for her father, her mother, her lost childhood, for the life she might have had if Tariq hadn't been so evil, if Rashid had been stronger. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be professional." "You're supposed to be human," Rashid corrected. "That's all. Just human." They stood like that for a long time, two people who had been enemies becoming something else. Not quite friends, not yet family, but allies, partners. Two damaged souls trying to build something better from the wreckage of the past. When Emma finally pulled away, wiping her eyes, she felt lighter somehow, as if crying had released some of the pressure that had been building inside her chest. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me, not as a threat or a vector or a way to absolve your guilt. Just seeing me." She smiled through her tears. "That's all my father wanted too, I think. To be seen. To matter." "You matter," Rashid said with quiet intensity. "You matter so much, Emma. And so did he. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure the world knows that." In the weeks that followed Tariq's arrest, Al-Masri Holdings underwent a transformation. Emma took an active role in the company's direction, pushing for the renewable energy investments her father had advocated decades earlier. She restructured the corporate giving program, established mentorship opportunities for young engineers, and instituted new ethics oversight to prevent future corruption. The Khalil Carter Foundation launched with a gala that drew hundreds of attendees, corporate leaders, politicians, academics. Emma gave a speech about her father's vision, his brilliance, his integrity. She stood on that stage in a beautiful gown, poised and confident, and told the world exactly who Khalil Carter had been. Not a failure, not a victim, a visionary who had been stolen too soon. Rashid watched from the audience, his eyes wet with tears. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt something that might have been peace.
After the gala, as Emma stood on a balcony overlooking the glittering city, Rashid found her. "You did well tonight," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted. "All those people looking at me, judging whether I'm worthy of my father's name. And I realized It doesn't matter what they think. I know who my father was. I know who I am. That's enough." Rashid nodded, understanding. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights. "I've been thinking," Emma said slowly, "about what comes next. The company is stable, the foundation is launched. Tariq will spend years in court before he's sentenced, but the criminal case is solid. So what do I do now?" "What do you want to do?" Emma considered. "I want to live, not just work, not just fight. I want to have dinner with my grandmother and not think about corporate strategy. I want to read books that have nothing to do with business. I want to figure out who Emma Carter is when she's not trying to prove herself or honor her father or seek justice." "That sounds perfect," Rashid said softly. "That sounds like exactly what you deserve." "And you?" She turned to face him. "What will you do? Keep running the company? Keep punishing yourself?" "Maybe it's time I stopped punishing myself," Rashid admitted. "Maybe it's time I tried to actually live too. Lila would have wanted that. Your father would have wanted that. They both believed in second chances, in redemption." He smiled sadly. "Maybe I should start believing in it too." Emma felt her heart constrict with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Over the months working together, something had shifted between them. The anger had softened. The partnership had deepened. There were moments, increasingly frequent moments, when she would catch herself watching him, noticing the way he listened intently when she spoke, the way he remembered small details, the way he made her feel heard and valued. She wasn't ready to call it forgiveness, but it was something. "I don't hate you anymore," she said quietly. Rashid looked at her with such vulnerability it made her chest ache. "You should. I deserve your hatred." "Probably, but I'm tired of hating, tired of being angry. My father lived in anger for 6 months and it killed him. I don't want that to be my legacy too." She took a breath. "I can't forgive what you did, not yet, maybe not ever. But I can try to understand, and I can choose to build something with you instead of against you." "Partners?" He held out his hand, echoing that first day in Tariq's office. Emma looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she took it. "Partners. For my father, for justice, and maybe someday for something more." They stood on that balcony, hands clasped, the city spreading out below them in all its chaotic beauty. Two people bound by tragedy, working toward healing. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magic moment of forgiveness, no sudden resolution of all their pain, but it was real, honest, human. And maybe, Emma thought, as she squeezed Rashid's hand gently, that was enough. Maybe that was exactly what her father would have wanted. Not revenge, not even justice, but two people broken and scarred, choosing to build something new together, choosing hope over hate, choosing to live rather than just survive. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain and full of possibility. The company her father helped build would continue. His legacy would live on through the foundation. And Emma, the invisible waitress who had become a billionaire, would continue to fight for people like her father, for the dreamers, the innovators, the ones who saw the future before anyone else. She looked at Rashid, at the man who had destroyed her father and was now her partner, and thought about the strange paths life took, the unexpected alliances, the complicated truth that people were neither purely good nor purely evil, but something messy and human in between. "Tell me more about him," she said softly. "About my father, a memory you haven't shared yet." Rashid's face brightened with remembrance. "There was this one time, late at night in the Dubai office. We had been working for 16 hours straight on a proposal. We were exhausted, punchy, our eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets, and Khalil just started laughing.
This huge, ridiculous laugh. I asked him what was so funny, and he said, "We're sitting in a climate-controlled office, worrying about moving imaginary numbers around on a screen, while somewhere a poet is starving and a child is discovering their first star. What are we doing with our lives, Rashid?" Emma smiled, tears in her eyes. "That sounds like him. My mother told me he used to quote poetry at the breakfast table. He believed business should have soul, that making money was meaningless if you weren't also making the world better. I laughed at him then, called him naive. But he was right. He was always right." They talked late into the night, Rashid sharing memories and Emma hoarding each one like treasure. Stories of her father's brilliance, his kindness, his terrible jokes, his love of spicy food and classical music. She learned that he could sing surprisingly well, that he was terrible at chess but never stopped trying to beat Rashid, that he cried at movies and laughed at his own puns, and believed, deeply and truly, that people were fundamentally good. As the city slowly quieted around them, Emma felt her father becoming real in a way he had never been before. Not just a memory or a faded photograph, but a person, complex and flawed and wonderful. "Thank you," she said, as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, "for giving him back to me." "He was always with you," Rashid said gently, "in your courage, your integrity, your refusal to be dismissed. Every time you stand up for what is right, he's there. And every time you try to do better, he's there, too, for both of us, reminding us who we could be." They watched the sunrise together, two people no longer defined by past tragedies, but by future possibilities. The waitress and the sheikh, the daughter and the friend. Partners in an unlikely alliance built on pain and growing towards something that might, eventually, be called healing. It wasn't an ending. Life rarely provided neat endings. But it was a beginning, a chance, an opportunity to build something her father would have been proud of. Not a company, not a fortune, but a connection. A bridge between two people who had every reason to hate each other and chose instead to try. Emma thought about the woman she had been just months ago, the girl who made herself invisible, who apologized for existing, who accepted cruelty as the price of survival. She was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who refused to be dismissed ever again. "I think," she said quietly, as the sun painted the city gold, "I think my father would be happy, not about everything, but about this, about us finding our way to each other, about justice, about his name being honored, about me finally knowing who he was. I know he would be, because he loved you more than anything in the world, and you turned out exactly as he hoped, strong, compassionate, brave enough to face the truth, even when it hurt." They stood together as the world woke up around them, the city beginning its daily rhythm. Somewhere below, people were starting their days, fighting their own battles, carrying their own wounds. The world kept turning, indifferent to individual tragedies and quiet triumphs.
But on that balcony, two people found something precious. Not forgiveness, which might never fully come, but understanding, connection, the knowledge that even the worst wounds could begin to heal if you let them. If you chose light over darkness, hope over despair, life over the slow death of eternal anger. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill her lungs. She was alive. She mattered. She was her father's daughter, and that meant something. It meant everything. "Come on," she said, turning toward the door. "We have work to do, a company to run, a foundation to build, a legacy to honor." "Together?" Rashid asked, hope in his voice. "Together," Emma confirmed. "Partners, for my father,
for justice, and for whatever comes next. They walked back inside, leaving the sunrise behind, ready to face another day, another challenge, another opportunity to build something worthy of the man they both loved and had both, in different ways, lost. The story didn't end there. Stories never really end. But it transformed, became something new, something neither of them could have imagined when Emma first spilled wine on Rashid's pristine clothes and he fired her with casual cruelty. That night in the restaurant felt like a lifetime ago. The waitress was gone. The cruel Sheikh was gone. In their place walked two people carrying scars, but facing forward, working together, building together, healing together, one difficult day at a time. And somewhere, Emma liked to think, Khalil Carter was watching. Proud of his daughter. Proud of his old friend finding his way back to the man he should have been. Proud of the legacy that would live on, long after they were all gone. Justice had been served. Truth had been revealed. And in the end, love, the complicated, messy, painful love between broken people trying to do better, had won. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes, Emma thought as she settled behind her desk in the office that had once belonged to her father, real was better than perfect. Real meant there was still work to do, still room to grow, still a future waiting to be built. And she was ready. Ready to build, ready to honor her father's memory, not with anger, but with action. Not with revenge, but with creating the world he had dreamed of. The beginning of the rest of her life started now, and Emma Carter, daughter of Khalil Carter, owner of 40% of Al-Masri Holdings, founder of the Khalil Carter Foundation, was done being invisible. She was done being dismissed. She was ready to change the world, just like her father always knew she could.